Hi, I'm Rich Sains, and you're listening to the Procurement Conversations Big Conversation. Join me as I talk to procurement leaders and industry specialists about the biggest issues facing our profession.
This week we're covering soft skills, which doesn't quite describe how transformative they are. Super skills is probably a more appropriate name. And I'm talking to Barry Holmes, who's worked with procurement teams for over 20 years honing these skills. Now, I personally feel my career was transformed by the time I spent with Baz. His deep understanding of this space is second to none.
Yeah, it's lovely to be here. So around 2000, which is a fair time ago, I realised I wanted to get into the learning space, but not in a theoretical way, in a very practical way. And we set up Zoom. And our approach then, as has been over the last few years, was to create experiential learning. So it wasn't just theoretical, people actually directly experienced it. And that led to a huge amount of opportunities working with the companies, organisations and charities in the UK and overseas. And I've been able to continue my fascination and passion for what creates a shift in people's perception, what shifts awareness, what brings about change. It's got infinite variety, infinite learning. I've been doing that for a considerable amount of time. And then more recently, that's transitioned into something new we're working on, Freedom First, which I can elaborate on a little bit later.
Great. And I know over that time period, you've worked with a lot of procurement teams and you've especially focused on these soft skills. So why are soft skills particularly important for procurement people?
I don't know. Well, it's certainly not by design, but I seem to have come into contact with a lot of procurement teams over the years, and my sense of that is the procurement requires both hard and soft skills. Yeah. And the hard skills are more obvious. So it's about the commercials, it's about the negotiation, it's about the deal, it's about the value over time. But it'd be interesting to get procurement people's perspectives. But my experience is all those things are enabled by the soft skills. So it's not soft skills over hard skills. For me, it's been about the right blend of soft skills and hard skills. Yeah. And just a very specific practical aspect of that is procurement people are often dealing with people either who are much more senior than them in terms of level, or they're people for whom they've got no direct control or influence, but they're trying to get them to shift their behaviour. So the skills around influence, how you position something you're trying to create change around, those skills are fundamental. And I've really enjoyed working in that space for procurement teams, procurement people over quite a number of years on some quite major projects and major initiatives.
Yeah, and I'd say that, I suppose, as the organisational silos are being broken down, actually it becomes more important to have these soft skills because actually there's no, the previous approach was you have a process, you've got a mandate, and if someone does something wrong, you can escalate it and you go to their manager and your manager has a fight with their manager and it's all very sort of adversarial. But actually, as those silos break down, now we're in this position where as you say, you have to be able to influence people. You've got to be able to get them to follow your path rather than the path that potentially they wanted to. So it's a bit more nuanced, I think.
Yeah, I feel like that. Well, there's never a project where this wasn't the tension. So there was the opportunity and the needs of the organisation to bring about quite a significant and major transformation. And that normally was expected or required by the procurement team. But the procurement team's credibility, legitimacy was based on the relationship with the internal stakeholders, which nearly always had something else at stake. Yeah. So you've got something up here you're trying to orientate around, but actually that's only going to happen based on the relationship with this individual, and they've got other things going on. So they're really in that brokering facilitation space of trying to match where the organisation is trying to go, but not break and actually add to the relationship with the individual they have. So, that space of sort of paradox and tension just feels the place that procurement people are constantly finding themselves in.
How do we learn these skills and how do we practice them, would you say?
Well, for me, there's three phases. So the first phase is awareness. You can't act on what you don't know, and so that awareness expands over time based on your experience. In a way, you don't want too much awareness too early because it can be a bit overwhelming. You know, I think typically in procurement teams, you get people to work on smaller projects where they can sort of learn their craft, which expands. And then from that awareness comes clarity about what is it I actually need to focus on, because there's infinite things you can focus on, but what are you going to focus on? And I think a lot of people rely on their technical capabilities and doing something right as opposed to what's needed to affect the change.
Yeah.
And then in all my experience, then it's about having a level of courage to go and test and try things. And it's a bit like a negotiation. You know, a negotiation isn't a binary algorithm. You can't exactly predict the outcome. But what you can do is greatly increase the chances of getting a better outcome through certain things. So, and there's been there's so much insight now into human behavior, techniques, how people respond. It's bringing those different techniques and approaches within that awareness. And then what we've spent a lot of time doing is giving people the opportunity to practice in a low or no risk environment. So, and I think that's really important because, for me, the key element is confidence.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't fake that. People either feel that or not. So,
totally.
Yeah.
Statistic we've got is that 12% of organisations focus their development on soft skills. Obviously, as we said, it's a key area for these teams. Why do you think they're not putting the right level of focus onto these skills?
Well, there's an analogy which is somebody loses their keys, and the person says, "Oh, well, let me help you look for them." So they go under the searchlight, and they're both looking for the keys. Then it occurs to him to ask him where he thinks he dropped them, and he says to him, "Well, I dropped them over there in the dark." And he says, "Well, why looking over there?" And he says, "Well, I can see over here." So the hard skills are measurable, tangible, KPI'd, metriced, all the rest of it. So people tend to gravitate towards what they think they know, where the soft skills are more of an art. They're not just an art, but they're more of an art and a science. So we can tend to gravitate towards where we're more comfortable rather than what's more useful.
Yeah.
So I actually think the idea of hard and soft skills is a bit, what's the word?
Sort of misnomer, or
yeah, because how do you define what a hard skill and a soft skill is? Like,
I mean, we get this thing with negotiation. Negotiation could sort of fall into both because traditionally it's been thought of as a bit of a hard skill. It's one of those sort of core competencies of a procurement person. But actually, a lot of elements in a successful negotiator are soft. They're behavioural, and sometimes those may get missed from that area. But as a bit of a case study, the work that we both worked on at M&S, that for me that was transformational in terms of my career. It was at exactly the right point where a lot of my skills until that point were hard skills. I've been through things like SIPs. I've been through some sort of basic rudimentary negotiation skills, learned a bit about how tenders work and that type of thing. But ultimately, until we put the effort in around things like influencing, communication, presenting, and some good negotiation skills training as well, that was what really took my career to the next level. And some of the projects that I worked on in that point at M&S, pretty much every year there was some massive project that I was working on, and I wouldn't have been able to have done those to the sort of the extent that I was able to and delivered the successful results I did if it hadn't been for all the soft skills work we'd done. So thank you.
Well, I wasn't seeking to claim any cred for that. It was just more, you recognise you're in a particular phase of your career and your life, and you were receiving a certain type and nature of development. And, for me, what was obvious to me around that time was the degree to which you embrace the development, because there's lots of development available, but if you're not interested in picking it up and it doesn't have relevance to you, like I say, that's more of an art than a science. A lot of people have very definitive preconceptions about learning, about development. And for me, I'm still learning this. It's all to do with the receptivity and intention and meaning. So, if there's no meaning, then why? If there's no receptivity, it's not going to happen. So, I think we're still learning this, and you only really have a perspective retrospectively, like you're saying when you look back.
So I've got my favourite 10 soft skills for procurement. So we run through those.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about what we see. I don't know if we should probably do it one by one, shouldn't we? So the number one is networking. And that's the art of building this diverse network. So your contacts, internal, external, and how we draw on those to sort of bring expertise, value and engagement to the role that we're doing. What would you add to networking? Is there sort of a skill behind it, or is it something that just comes with experience? I mean, it's probably, I guess there's less of a skill behind it. It's more about building an asset, isn't it?
Well, this sounds really brutal, but I read in the last couple of weeks, somebody said, doing your job really well in the absence of anything else is career suicide. And it's a fairly brutal statement, but I think it's fairly accurate. That, and particularly in relation to procurement, when you're seeking to influence people outside the sphere of your direct reports or influence or control. So for me, my external perspective is the most effective procurement people are the ones, they've got their internal network, they've got their stakeholders, they've got their objectives, but they build an external and wider network of relationships based on trust, based on reciprocation, that sit outside those confines, so that when needed, you can find indirect ways of creating an outcome. And that's sophisticated, I think. I'd say, I mean, I've worked with a lot of procurement people who have a very good internal network, but they have no external referencing.
Yeah.
Or you can have lots of external reference, but you don't have the internal traction. Your team can love you, but the senior managers aren't sure. So my view is the more rounded that is, and the fundamental awareness or skill in that is you can't become so busy on the day-to-day or the thing in front of you that you forget to connect with the people around the situation.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So because actually, it's about that. It's about the quality of network, and actually, it's easy to have 1,000 people that know you as a bit of an idiot, isn't it? But you've got to also have that trust and respect, and ability to get stuff done. So if it's a salesperson that you're working with, they've got to have a positive experience with you. So actually, then all the other soft skills come into play. And the sort of to the extent that you're effective at communicating with them, or whatever the other skill would be.
Yeah.
Next one, so communication, and obviously this is key in any job, but particularly so in procurement. What are your views on communication? I think we'll be talking a bit more about it later on, aren't we? But
yeah, well, I'll give an example. So we worked with quite a large organisation that were pitching for multi-million-pound contracts, and enormous amount of work went into the pitching of those contracts. And they had somebody from a technical perspective, there's someone from a marketing, branding perspective, and there's someone a financial perspective. But when we started to do some research, what we realised is it wasn't joined up. So what the client or the stakeholder, the customer is receiving was a bit all discombobulated and disjointed. Now, what was interesting about that situation was whoever won got 100% of the benefit. Whoever came second got 0.
Yeah.
So procurement isn't necessarily about pitching ideas and selling, but it is about creating influence and getting decisions made. So if all the same amount of work goes in from everybody, I'd say, but only one person or one team gets the decision. So you can do all the most brilliant work in the world, but you can fall at the last hurdle because it's not articulated or expressed particularly well. And that in itself is an art and a science. So a lot of the work we've done is taking the numbers, taking the data, taking the business case and saying, well, what does that mean in the mind and through the eyes of the person you're seeking to influence? And pretty much across the board, we get the feedback, God, I'd never thought about it from their perspective. It's just obvious to us why we need to do it. But until you shift your perspective to the person you're seeking to influence, there's, it's a bit like, finding a pin in the dark by putting your foot on the floor and trying to hit it. But it doesn't have to be like that.
No. Actually, the next one is around influencing. So that, bringing people with you, getting your point of view across in the way that changes their behaviour. What else would you say about influencing?
Well, my experience is the vast majority of people I work with in procurement are naturally very good influencers because it requires it in the role. Negotiation is all about influence. What I feel is beyond negotiation is the more subtle skills of developing relationships over time, and particularly bringing influence to bear where maybe it's not necessarily obviously required.
Yeah.
So, quite often what happens with procurement teams I work with is they'll only be talking to somebody at the point of bringing them bad news. Either we're taking something away, we need to do something. So understanding how to put those relationships in place, how to create boundaries. I think the best procurement people I've seen are natural facilitators.
Yeah.
So they're able to move in a meeting from their own agenda to working with the dynamics in the room and creating value in any situation. So I think the core negotiation skills are really helpful in that because it gives you a base. But then I think there's a broader range of skills to develop that aren't just about negotiation. And then once we go back to the first one, once you've got a really strong network with a lot of trust and relationships already built, there's all sorts of things that now become possible that other people maybe think weren't possible or they didn't know how you did it.
Yeah. I guess there's a part of influence that ties into, it's almost sales, isn't it? So and in procurement, the sales element is often overlooked, but actually there's a profession that people don't know a lot about. So there's a bit about selling the profession and selling the benefit to the stakeholders of why it's important to work with procurement. That's all part of the influence, isn't it?
Oh yeah, completely. And I've heard this a lot. Procurement's a tricky place in a sense because if you make too much noise about how good and great procurement is and the value it creates, it can hack people off because of you guys. But if you're too quiet about it, you're working in the background, then what's the purpose of that function? So there's a real balance between people being aware of the value that's created, and everyone thinks they can negotiate. But I've learnt myself, it is really a deep science and art and an expertise there.
Yeah.
It's a balance between getting the expertise but helping people to do things themselves.
Okay. The next one I had was around strategic thinking. So, the wider strategy, being aware of it, formulating strategy, formulating a plan or a way of working. How do you sort of build on this one?
It's funny, I've been talking to someone about this today. That, there's a brilliant book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which I read quite some years ago. And I've been in the room literally dozens, maybe hundreds of times talking about strategy. And what I've realised afterwards is everyone's saying apples and pears and something else. Because you say the word strategy, but unless we're all agreed about what it means, we don't even know what we're talking about.
No.
So, and one of the principles that I really connected with in relation to that book was there's no separation between strategy and action. But a lot of people have a perception that there's strategy and action. Those two things are separated. So I feel like whether it's intentional or not, overt or not, procurement teams end up being the unofficial strategy implementers in nearly all organisations because they're the ones with the internal network. They're the ones with the external supplier relationships. They're the one with the mandate or not to create a change. So having an awareness and understanding of what strategy is, how you implement it, how you follow it through, it is fundamental. It feels to me like absolutely fundamental.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. That the split between execution and formulating the strategy in the first place, because obviously there's a bit about we want our teams to be involved with the stakeholders, formulating the strategy, having a say at that point. But actually, the thing that a lot of organisations are bad at is getting around and executing on the strategy and delivering it. Because a lot of these things live in PowerPoints and they never see the light of day. That's one of the issues, isn't it? So I think there's sort of probably both areas that we're looking at there. Next thing, so being around data driven. What would you think about data driven?
Well, I'd say the most useful consideration in relation to being data driven is objectivity. So rather than making decisions on a subjective perception of how something is, it can be incredibly useful to be objectively looking at, well, what does the actual data tell you? And there's loads of books written, Thinking Fast and Slow, that largely suggest we are wholly subjective, motivated beings, and we have enormous unconscious bias. So for me, being data-driven isn't bringing in a big statistics hammer and whacking people on the head with it, saying, here's the proof of why we should do this. But it is offering objective information that helps people make a more balanced, considered decision in relation to the actual. The other thing that's really front of my mind is around benchmarking. So if you're looking to evidence a shift from here to there, talking about shift, the train's coming through. But if you want to evidence change, well, what's the baseline? What are we baselining? And then are we checking back against the original baseline? Because that's another consideration for me about we often don't track progress because we're so focused on the next thing. So rather than look at, well, where have we shifted from to where we are now, we're just in the new now. And so one of the things I try and do is encourage, let's actually look at the progress we've made. Let's look at the learning from that experience. Data is fundamental to being able to.
I think it's probably a precursor to the strategic thinking one as well, isn't it? Because actually it sets the context. Like being able to look through the data, sniff out the opportunities, tell the story using the data, and then use that to set the context for the strategy is actually, it's a natural progression, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. And that's the blend of the hard and soft. Because if you use the actual data and then create stories and narratives based on the data, then you've kind of got the perfect mix, because you can engage people in relation to kind of the emotional, subjective side, what excites them, what they're curious about, but you're actually basing it in something that gives confidence and reassurance. And I think that the most effective procurement strategies I see naturally move very easily between the two. They're not sort of stuck in one.
Next one was around teamwork. And that's obviously something that's critical, collaboration, not just within your function, but also outside the function. As procurement, we lead multifunctional teams quite often. So that's a key element. What would you say is the best way to sort of foster that ability? Because some people play nicely and others don't play so nicely, I suppose. And
it's partly to do with semantics. So the word team is bandied around a lot, but there's an enormous difference between a group of people who have a superficially shared agenda and intention and an actual team. So for me, a team is more than the sum of the parts with a shared outcome. And really, you only know, if a team is present is when the pressure's applied. Is everyone out for themselves, or everyone out for each other? Or is everyone out for the purpose? So, and given what we've talked about, all of the outcomes usually that procurement involved in delivering are highly sophisticated and interconnected with other things.
Yeah.
So there's no such thing as an individually successful procurement person.
No.
There is only a procurement person who's extremely good at leveraging their network, building teams, building trusts, and creating synergy. And there's something called synarchy, where you're able to see the big picture, you're able to inculcate trust in a group of people, and you're able to help and move those people. And as an individual within that group, it in my experience, it nearly always means giving up something for yourself for the greater good.
Yeah.
So the greater degree of your ego, the less able you are to function well in teams. It's not no ego, but high ego makes it very difficult to function well in teams. And for me, out of all of them, that's like the magic ingredient. If you can, and creating informal teams, as in they may not even identify themselves as one, but you just feel it when you walk in a room. You know, people want to collaborate. They naturally share their ideas. They instinctively support each other. They don't undermine each other.
So to an extent, this is something that's set by the leadership. Like the leadership should, within a procurement team, they should be setting a team strategy, team vision, having a very clear common purpose for everyone, and that helps to bind the team, the sort of the procurement team. And then I guess some of those lessons that are learned there, that helps those individual team members to go when they're creating these sort of informal teams amongst stakeholders or whatever. That sort of, you know, they know what a good team looks like and a bad team looks like, and they can, there's sort of almost like a self-learning piece there, isn't there?
Yeah, I'd say what you just said, ideally, but not necessarily. I've worked in some teams where the head of procurement wasn't naturally someone who inculcated the team environment, but they had people in their team who were very naturally good at it. So my personal view is anyone personally can come at things from a way that creates that team environment. But of course, it's much easier if the leader naturally does that, sets that tone and creates those conditions, then it's going to be easier.
Yeah. So next one, problem solving. And obviously things do go wrong quite fairly often, I think, in procurement. It's probably, So you've got to be able to sort of think on your feet and solve some problems. Is there anything that people could be doing to sort of, I don't know, hone that as a soft skill?
Absolutely. What is it that's saying? Like, you can't solve a problem at the level that it was created. So for me, the first thing is open-mindedness.
Yeah.
The next one is responding, not reacting. You know, if it appears to be a problem, how you respond rather than how you react. What you don't want to do is people panicking, pointing fingers. So, yeah, I mean, one of the things we're going to get into is how do you create the conditions when you do inevitably face a problem, roadblock, difficulty to overcome that or move through it or shift around it. And what I found is, I mean, there's no such thing as a project with no problems.
No,
the whole point is. But what happens is when individuals and teams move through those problems together, solving the problems, and when I was about to say not falling out, maybe they do fall out, but falling out and getting over it, that creates a resilience and there's a phrase like self-efficacy changes people. Once they realise they can change things way more than they thought, it builds a confidence.
Yeah.
So ideally what you want is, I mean, it's a bit idealistic to say people get a problem, they go, oh, yippee, we've got a problem, isn't this fantastic? But do you know what I mean? They're not fazed by it.
Yeah.
You know, the contractor didn't deliver, the timeline's shortened, we didn't get the thing. Okay, so what's the options? And then open-mindedness and non-dismissiveness of ideas. Because even if you don't get good ideas or you perceive you don't get ideas initially, the energy of allowing different ideas to come in creates momentum. You know, and ideas will arrive, and then you can act on them.
I think problem solving is probably one of those ones that's helped by a number of the other soft skills. So things like having a good network, you can obviously ring around, find people who can help with a particular issue. Communication, obviously flagging an issue, communicating, getting people to support on that. We're going to be talking about creativity in a minute. You know, coming up with creative solutions to those issues, and actually resolving conflicts, another one. And as you say, you might you get into a bit of a problem, people start pointing fingers and they start to get into this conflict. So yeah, that's another time where the resolving conflict skill can be pretty important.
Well, yeah, and data. Oh, it's bad. Well, how bad is it exactly?
Yeah.
It's like once you know the extent of it, then you can move forward from the actual extent of it. So yeah, you're right. They all play into that.
Okay. So next one was responsibility. And I don't know, is this a skill or is this like a sort of a cultural aspect within the team, taking responsibility? I don't know. What are your thoughts? Does it actually fit as a soft skill?
Well, no one wants to feel bad. It's a risk of stating the obvious. So one of the ways we avoid feeling bad is to not take responsibility. And in the short term, that can be a good feeling, like pass the buck, it's not me, happened because of this. But actually, it's a very disempowering response to things. So for me, responsibility isn't blaming myself or criticizing myself, but it is about saying, what agency do I have in this situation?
Yeah.
And how can I respond to this? And how can I support this? And what I've seen a lot is individuals that do that, which are quite unique, they instantly change the dynamic. Because in a situation where everyone's pointing and you should have, and why didn't we, the person that says, well, it's on me, accept it, so what can we do?
Yeah.
It immediately creates the potential for momentum going forward.
I think like historically procurement as a function, in these silos, it was helping stakeholders to spend their money, operationally weren't as involved in any sort of issues like that. So actually it was quite easy to sort of say, well, we've got no responsibility, we've got no accountability. We just literally we're sort of a conduit. But actually, as we say, as the silos break down now, you sort of, by taking responsibility, especially when there are problems, sort of saying, look, I'm going to solve this, I'm going to get this sorted. And actually, I suppose as part of the negotiation, often, the problems or issues will come up during that, and that is definitely something that the procurement teams need to be getting involved in and supporting to taking responsibility, supporting that to get that closed out.
Well, yeah, and it comes back to your networking. If somebody's effed up or made a mistake or is in a difficult situation, and you step in and you actually help them around that situation, that shifts the relationship.
Totally, yeah.
If the team's, not done something right and there's an issue with the team, and you're prepared to own that and step in and show that you're prepared to take a bit of the flack, it shifts the relationship. So, but it's attention. You don't want to take on that which isn't yours. But my view is we have way more agency than we think we have. And that's about depersonalizing things. It's like, it's not personal. What's the situation? What can I do to make it better? Move it on.
Yeah.
I
think, because I don't know about you, but when you're working with someone and you can see that they've got like real leadership potential, quite often those are the people that go out their way to take responsibility for things. So you think, actually, you probably don't need to be taking responsibility for this, but it's good that you are. And actually, those are the people that do make the difference, and they're the people that do sort of move on in their careers.
Yeah, and particularly where the aspirations, the opportunities, the problems being worked on are quite substantial and complex, and it's not an exact science. So if you're really going to see the benefit you could create, it comes with a level of risk. And you can't mitigate all the risks. So what are you going to do? You're going to mitigate all the risk and have these little tiny incremental... I've not worked with a single procurement team that worked with 3% improvement, 2% this. They're normally working on transformation. So they're going to try and create these jumps, and sometimes they're not going to make it.
Yeah.
So by owning it immediately, it just takes the energy of situation and creates the possibility of moving on. Cool. Well, maybe I'm idealising sometimes, maybe not,
And the last one I had to go through today really was the creativity. So this sort of creative thinking, like how that's something that's been written about a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of disciplines and professions that are probably arguably a bit more creative than procurement, but there's a place for it in procurement as well. How are the best organisations taking this creativity and sort of building on that?
Yeah, I think the last one is the ultimate differentiator. It's like the most creative person in the room will always win. As in, they can think of more options than anyone else. Therefore, there's more space and movement. So 20 odd years ago, I did a project for a publishing company on creativity, and I did lots of research, lots of reading, lots of studies. And the revelation came to me is the idea that creativity is creating something new is an illusion. All creativity is about new and different connections with that which already is. So that suddenly changes things, because you're not trying to bring something new into being. What you're doing is you're reconfiguring things that already exist into a different form. So what that does is require an open mind, not too attachment to your ideas about what's right, and the willingness to sort of put your ego down and take views and perspectives from other things. And I believe that is a uniquely distinct human quality that is kind of infinite. You know, creativity has no limit, and we're finding this in lots of different examples of what people are doing that no one else thought possible. So I do see that as essential if anyone's going to rise, expand. But the creativity doesn't necessarily need to come from you personally. You don't need to be the personal ideas generator. You might be someone who's able to generate ideas around you, and in a sense that's way more powerful, because
facilitating that process.
Yeah. And people are way more inclined to act on the ideas that they've come up with than the ideas you've told them. I've said to a lot of procurement directors, senior leaders, is you're way better off going with a 60 to 80% good idea, but it's come from the team, than a 100% brilliant idea that's come from you. You know, and that's a hard thing to sort of take on board, because you can think, well, if we did it this way, it would be perfect. Well,
but then you've got the ego as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
Especially when you had a particularly good idea. I really want this to happen.
Yeah.
So those are the skills that we wanted to talk through. I think the in terms of I had one more question, which was, so we talked a lot about procurement and the way that they interact with stakeholders and how soft skills are important for that. I suppose the thing we probably haven't talked so much about is about salespeople. And actually, salespeople have probably been working on soft skills for many, many years. You know, I guess what other skills are there in terms of sales? So what's your experience in working with salespeople on soft skills? And have you got any sort of insights of what's happening on the other side of the table?
So quite a long time ago, I was doing a lot of work at British Airways, the procurement team there. I got a lot of my relationships at British Airways. And when you go to Waterside, you sign in, you get a visitor's badge with your name and a photograph and everything, and you go for the turnstiles. And two of the procurement guys there, who I won't say because it might embarrass them, but it's compliment, is one of the things they said to me is, "Oh, you're wearing your hunting license." So their perception was anyone supplier side that got through those turnstiles with the badge on was hunting, and their job was to kind of
like gamekeepers.
Exactly. Their job was to gamekeep the hunters. So, and I've worked on a load of projects between sort of the sales and the procurement side. Have you heard this phrase? When an unstoppable object meets the movable force. It's like the sales guys are trained in all these Machiavellian dark arts around buying signals, and then the procurement guys are trained in all these, you know, opening extreme, foxes, the Russian front, and they sort of go into a kind of dance or combat together, you know, which I actually think is really enjoyable, and it's just part of business. So it's like if you're naive, you're going to get eaten alive. If you're cynical, you're going to limit the possibility of what you can do. I think procurement is a fine balance between not being naive and therefore, well, actually, you're not going to get very far if you're not doing good deals and you've been taken advantage of by salespeople. But if you get too hard and cynical, the salespeople are still human beings with families and bonuses. So I think it's enjoying that game and seeing it. It's an important game with consequences, but nonetheless, it's a game. And again, like we've said throughout the conversation, it's just depersonalising it. So I wouldn't necessarily say let's learn all the skills of a salesperson so we can mitigate them. It's just being aware, they're using this technique, and sort of, for me, in a humorous way, in a light way, just letting them know that you're aware of that technique, and showing them that you know what you're doing. You can handle yourself in the room.
Okay. And lastly, where can people find you, and what are you up to? And you mentioned Freedom First. What's that about?
Well, a friend used to introduce me as, this is Barry, but be careful if you talk to him because you probably quit your job, right? Which I just want to clarify is not true. Not everyone I meet quits their job. But what I realised from what he'd said and the experience I'd had is, the thing that gives me the most joy is when people open up enough about who they are, what they really want, what they care about. I really love those conversations. And over the years, I have helped people who was ready to transition into a new job, out of their industry, into a new role, or set up a business. So I realised that's been a consistent theme for me. I've just loved always. And so as I was deciding I wanted to try something new after 27 years of Zoom, I thought, well, let's turn that into something. So then the idea of, well, I feel this really strongly, which is freedom first, which is freedom can't be defined in any generalized way because it has a unique meaning to everybody. So one person's freedom is when I get 5 million. Another one is, I don't know, I get to play at 3 o'clock on a Thursday football with my kid. It's has different meanings. But the idea of it being first is if I make my freedom my first priority, and this is absolutely that exception. The people I spend time with who feel the most free are the happiest, most open, most generous, most giving. So I feel really passionately about, well, I'm on that journey to my own freedom, but I love helping people move to just that next place because I love seeing what it does to them, and it just opens up lots of possibilities.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for talking to us today, Baz. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. Do like and share and subscribe to hear the next procurement conversation.